All right. I guess you can let the interrogation begin.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what you were into, and tell us a little about that.
Well, I was born and raised here in Shreveport, Louisiana. Came from a very conservative Catholic family. My mom was a school teacher at St. Joseph's, and my dad's a retired attorney. Graduated, and I'll show my age here, graduated from Captain Shreve in 1981, and typical high school student coming out of college going into college didn't know what I wanted to do, so I enrolled at LSUS in business administration, and I hated it. And at the same time that I was in school, I was also playing in a band. So I started playing in bands when I was 17 years old, and I had the decision. The band started. We were playing at night while I was going to LSUS, and so I was getting home at 3 o'clock in the morning, getting up for an 8 o'clock class. So the band got popular, and we had the chance to go on the road. So it was either stay in school or go on the road. So I decided to, of course, go on the road with a reggae band. Can y'all pick me out? I'm not on the very end. So I'm third in there. I'm 19 years old. I'm bulletproof. I'm ready to become famous and make a lot of money. And for the next year, probably about a year and a half, I toured with the band. We were making $150 each a week, which is $7,200 a year. Anyway, after a year and a half, we were doing about 50 cities a year. I came back, tail tucked between my legs, and decided to go back to school, but I didn't want to go to college, so I went to, back then it was called VOTech, which is the Northwest Technical College.
Okay, so I know you talked about, obviously, your reggae band. Were you always into computers, or was there something that got you excited about them, and how'd you develop that interest?
Well, actually, I'll plug Caddo Career Center since they've got a good showing here. Actually, back then, Justin, there weren't really a whole lot of computers. There was all green screen, and they were very expensive, and so there wasn't any kind of geeks. But I got into electronics. I went to Career Center my junior and senior year and really got into electronics heavy, and really enjoyed that aspect of it. I learned a lot about troubleshooting. I worked for a music store working on guitar amps and synthesizers and keyboards, and so I developed my logic for troubleshooting and things like that, which would lead into after VOTech going into starting a job.
So I've heard from a lot of people in the computer sector, whether it's software development or the IT and networking side, say that they really for a long time just thought about working for someone else, and they never had the idea of actually starting their own company. So what got you into that? Was there kind of a light bulb moment, or did you just kind of segue into it?
Well, actually, when I got out of the technical college, it took about 6 months, and I found a job here right on Texas Street at a place called Businessland, and it was a retail storefront. So we had computer on the floor, and I was a technician there. I worked my way up from being a grunt technician, what we call grunt, deliver and everything, on up to a systems engineer where I was designing networks and everything. And I worked there for 7 years. I didn't know at all that I was going to start my own business, until everything started going south with the company I was working for.
Right. So obviously ECS is what everyone knows you for. Was that the first kind of entrepreneurial endeavor you pursued, or did you do anything else before that?
I was thinking about that when we visited last week. Actually, this is the first entrepreneurial endeavor I did. If you think about it, the band as a company, I was human resources because I handled all the money and payroll and everything. I kept up with all the expenses because I was 19. See, and look at that. I mean, who else is responsible up there? Actually, the guy holding on to the bars, he was the manager. He was and so we kind of ran the band. And so I kept up with all the expenses. I kept up with all the bar tabs, and then I'd pay everybody at the end of the week.
So what actually led you to founding ECS? I mean, of everything you could have founded, why a computer services company?
Well, what was happening, there was two things. The company that I worked for, Businessland, started out in San Jose. We're based out of San Jose, so it was a really cool California-based company. There was a lot of pressures that were going on in the industry because we dealt with IBM, Dell, and Apple mainly, right? So it was $5,000, $6,000 for a computer, 35% profit margins in it. So services was never looked at as a profit center. The company made some really stupid decisions and started going downhill fast. And then we got bought out by Jamaica Water Properties, which was a water company out of New York. So we went from this really cool California company to this really stuck-up New York company, water utility company that had no idea how to run a computer company. So we went from a downhill like this to this. I was actually in Orlando, Florida when they were going across the nation laying off people and shutting down centers and everything else. And they were actually pulling people out of our class and saying, you don't have a job anymore, get on a plane and go. So probably one of the best things that happened to me was working for Businessland or JWP, because I learned how not to treat people and how not to treat customers.
So you obviously made kind of a big jump, being so young and just working for Businessland for several years, and then founding your own services company in the same realm. So who did you lean on during that time to kind of give you the advice and the mentorship to get started?
Well, actually, unfortunately, back then we didn't have a cohab, right?
Right.
So I leaned on my dad a lot. I mean, he was an attorney. He was a pretty wise man, and he had some pretty interesting remarks. We started out at Madison Park Business Center. He goes, well, son, that's where you start out or end up. And, and also, he said that 50-50 partnerships don't work out. And that's true, because my partner and I, there was only there's probably about 3 or 4 of us in the company then. And we weren't seeing eye to eye. And he was where's Keith Hansen? A entrepreneur. Keith coined that phrase. And there's a difference between an entrepreneur and an entrepreneur, obviously. So.
Well, I guess before we talk a little bit more about that, you mentioned the 50-50 not always working out. Could you expand on that a little bit? Because I know a lot of people, when they go into business, that's, they're either doing it with one other person or 2 other people. So could you talk about that? Kind of like what is your advice as far as that goes? Well,
when the company really started taking off was in 1997, sorry. And we Herd McElroy and Vestal spun their computer division off into ECS. So we had a tiebreaker, because in 50-50, if you ever have a dispute, you have to have some way to break that tie. My partner at the time, Ron, thought that everything was fine. And obviously it wasn't, because there was other people doing a lot more work than he was. So getting Kevin involved in everything, we eventually bought Ron out in 1998 for $75,000. He thought he got away with murder. And since then it's just been taking off like a rocket.
So what were some of ECS, has a long history now, and you talked about a couple of things there. What were some big turning points and milestones with ECS as far as, it maybe doubling in size or expanding or, pursuing new fields? Yeah.
So obviously in 97 when Herd spun off their group into ours, and they still have a 6% stake in the company, that was a big turning point, because that gave us a deeper pockets to go after bigger deals. And all the mergers that we've done, ArcLaComp about 5 years ago, Trusted Data Solutions 2.5 years ago, and Synapse back in 2001. Those were all big because we were growing organically. I mean, we started out with 6 clients. If we look at our database today, we have about 4,000 that we work with off and on. So when you merge, you automatically gain the expertise that you may not have, but you also gain clients.
Was there ever a time when you thought ECS or one of the companies you had acquired was going to shut down for any kind of reason?
Sure. Not ECS, knock on wood. We've only lost money 2 times, 2 months in 20 years. and not much, like $1,800. About killed me, right? But we had an incident about 7 years ago with Synapse where we had the founders going through a divorce and wanting to work together. We had developed a product that was poorly written, and it was crashing, and we didn't know. It was for a content management system for TV stations, and we wouldn't know that until a snowstorm was coming through Lexington, Kentucky, stressing the servers. They crash, and TV stations are, they're not very tolerant of stuff like that. We were losing at one time $50,000 a month for a series of months. And the problem is that I know how to fix ECS, but I didn't know how to fix Synapse. So there was a lot of sleepless nights, wondering what to do, and trying not to reflect that to the people of Synapse because it was getting ugly. Luckily, that year, things turned around. We got a consultant in, and things turned around, and I was really happy that we only lost $18,000 that year.
So you talked a little bit about when there's a problem with ECS, that's your expertise. So it's easy for you to say, change this or change that, but you couldn't do that with Synapse. There are more people these days founding tech companies with other people who have that expertise, but they themselves don't.
Right.
So how does someone who's not an expert in something they've co-founded with someone or something they're trying to run, how do they manage that?
Well, what you do is you just go after the best talent you can. I mean, right now we got Keith Simpson on board. He's doing a great job. He's doing the best job that anybody ever has in that piece. And you trust them. You give them whatever resources and whatever money they need to run their business, right?
Right.
We treat that kind of as his own little entity. And then I just get out of the way. I go have a cup of coffee with him in the morning, and I say, hey, man, everything's good? Okay, cool. And then he goes, I need more money. I go, okay, great.
So obviously, you talked about 3 or 4 companies you've acquired through the years. There are a lot of entrepreneurs who think some have a really long-term vision and say, I'm going to run this company for 30 years. Some have a short-term vision and think they're going to run a company for 5 or 10 years and then get acquired by someone. Mm-hmm. And you said, these acquisitions that you made were they were specific to goals you wanted to accomplish. You wanted to expand, or you wanted to target a new market. So in your mind, when you're looking at acquiring someone, what puts them on your radar screen in the first place, and what makes it a good acquisition for you?
Sure. Well, for instance, I met the founders with Synapse at a Chamber of Commerce function, and they were into website design. They were up and coming. They weren't growing as fast as they could. They were a natural fit for us because we do basic computer repair, break fix, on up to advanced network design, security, voice over IP, things like that. So we look at segments that we're not in, and then we see if they're a fit culturally, if they're going to work. So with Synapse, it was pretty easy because we could go talk to a client and say, go from basic stuff on up to application development, website design, or whatever. With Arclacomp, he had John Katz had a really good managed services practice, which we wanted to get into, and he had honed that down, and he was 4 or 5 people. So anyway, you look for companies, and you say the same thing that when I was talking to Herb McElroy and everything is that I had 50% of a pie that was this big, but now I've got 38% of a pie that's a lot bigger, and so it just makes sense because we've got the back office set up, we've got the machine running, and then it's easy to just plug people in as we need to. Right.
So I know one of the things you kind of mentioned the culture there for a second, and I know when I worked at Synapse for a little while, the culture was something I noticed immediately because I had talked to a couple other companies locally, and they were very stale, sterilized environments. There was nothing fun going on. There was you come, you sit down, you write some code, you go home. But at Synapse, it was very different. There's pool tables, there's some different things to do during break times and lunch times. So what kind of culture do you look to foster, and what good benefits have you seen from doing that?
Well, what you want to do, I mean, again, coming from business land, I learned what not to do. It was like that. I mean, I had to wear a coat and tie every day, and they didn't realize that we're in Shreveport, Louisiana. In August, it's kind of hard to crawl underneath somebody's desk in a coat and tie and work on their computer. You want to develop. The culture starts when you start your business. And you want to develop a place where people want to come to work and enjoy coming to work, and then you're going to get more production out of them. I mean, it's that easy. You know, the pool table, the beanbag chairs, the workout room we have now, the shower. I mean, it's all for the people that work there, and you know, and to try to make it a cool place to work.
This is also going off the cultural question there. I know that you've made agreements with at least Keith Simpson to run his company Sky Coach kind of under the Synapse and ECS umbrella. Mm-hmm. What got you excited about Sky Coach and his idea, and what made you think that was the right decision to keep it under your umbrella?
Well, right now, yeah, Sky Coach will eventually be spun off. I mean, we're getting a lot of traction with that, and a lot of it was you know, it's Keith's baby. He came up with it. And just to see his excitement and how much he's poured his heart and soul into it, you know, I mean, we got 3 people flying all over the United States right now promoting it. So we really hope it takes off, because we've got a lot sunk into it, you know. But you know, it's giving people the ability to you know, to empower them to be able to create things. And Keith's going to be a huge part of that. And if it takes off, Keith will be a very wealthy man.
Right. I know this is going to be a question what I'm about to ask is going to be something that quite a few people in the audience, this is, you know, something several of you have thought about a lot. There are some companies, local and even national companies, that the second, you know, there's an employee talking about starting their own company, mm-hmm. or they have this idea they want to pursue, the first thing that boss says is, "Hey, get out of here," or "Don't talk about that in my office."
Yeah.
So, you know, for a lot of companies, you making that decision to have that under your umbrella, a lot of companies wouldn't have made that decision. But I know it goes into the cultural issue that you were talking about earlier. So what in your mind makes it a better decision to let someone run that under your company rather than just kicking them out and letting them go on their own? Well,
because a lot of times, I mean, like I said, you know, there's a ECS has got a great back end machine, right? And so, you know, for Keith to go off on his own and do this, he'd have to go get money. He'd have to, you know, it would deter the process for him being successful. We encourage anybody, especially on the Snap side. Now on the ECS, it's a little different. You know, you don't want people going out and competing against you,
right?
You know, but you know, you know, we foster the innovation and the imagination of our developers, and anybody's got that opportunity to bring us the idea, and you know, we'll say, yeah, we'll fund this, and you know, they get a piece of it.
Right. So I'm a little curious about Sky Coach. Actually, let me just ask, before we go any further, how many people here know what Sky Coach is? Okay, quite a few people. When you answer this question, just kind of do a brief overview of it, because I know a few hands didn't go up. But my question was, how did Keith approach you with this idea? Did he kind of walk in when you were drinking coffee one day and say something to you, or you know, how did you find out about what he wanted to work on?
Okay, so Sky Coach is basically the high school football has changed the rules where you can have streaming video and streaming technology on the sideline. So Keith was a coach here, and we've been doing streaming for 10 years. You know, we failed at streaming because we went into the churches and we said, "Hey, man, you want to stream your sermon?" And they go, "No, you know, we're good." And so Keith took it to the next level, and he started filming his games. And it's basically a little lens that sits on an iPhone. You get up in the stand. You say first down, you record the play, second down, record the play as a pass or whatever, and then that streams down to, now they've gotten really creative. A lot of the high school teams are using big screen TVs. They get the offense around the TV. They show them where they're messing up and this and that. We had 12 teams using it in the state finals, and 8 of them won that are attributing it to Sky Coach. So this is taking off like wildfire right now. So what's your question? Sorry,
no, that's okay. No, my question was, how did Keith approach you with the idea?
Okay, so Keith said, I went in his office and he said, "Man, check this out." And so he had all these football plays going on the screen and everything. I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I took Stream Now, which was our streaming technology," and he goes, "I just wanted to start recording football games and see if that happened." And then what he would do is he was recording and streaming it to an iPad, and he would give it to the offensive coordinator while the defense is on the field, and then back and forth. And then he said, "Did that work?" And the defense guy said, "They didn't score on us." And and so he took it to the next step. The next step, he approached us, the partners, and said, "This is going to be expensive," and we were all in, because we trust Keith. I mean, you got to trust your employees. You got to empower your employees. It'd be real easy to say, "No, we're not going to do that," and then I'd be kicking myself in the, foot for him making something that cool that how it's turned out.
Right. You talked a little bit about trusting your employees, and I know for a lot of people in the audience, some people are just one person shops right now. Some people are at 5, 10, or 15 employees, and obviously you're at, was it 46 or 47 now? So you have a lot of experience hiring people, firing people, and training people. So in a new employee, what is it that you look for to hire them? And then also, have there been any situations where you had a really bad situation with an employee and you turned it around somehow?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we've gotten some. We got the black sheep, one employee, and we got him from another computer company here in town, and he was a mess. I mean, he couldn't get to work on time to save his life. But you developers, right? you can't say get to work at 8 o'clock. There's no way. So anyway, we kind of adapted around him. We created a flex time to where people could come in up to 10 o'clock in the morning. Not everybody's cut out for that, and he's turned out to be an incredible employee, probably one of our top ones. You manage to people's strengths and not their weaknesses, and you're not going to change them. Now, if there's something that's detrimental to the company, you can't hang on to them too long and try to rehabilitate them because, some people just aren't going to do that. But typically we try to find them a job or something that's more of a fit for them.
Right. So my other question was just about, I think you touched on this just a little bit, but I guess just as far as if you're recruiting somebody, not somebody you already have, but just if you're recruiting somebody for X position or Y position, what do you look for that gets you really excited about a prospective hire?
Well, I mean, one of our best employees on the ECS side, I look for attitude. I look for somebody who's wanting to learn. We can teach them this stuff. One of our best employees on the ECS side was managing one of the sleazy hotels over in Bossier, and he was going to school part-time, and he's one of our best Cisco engineers now, and I just saw that just talking to him. I've got a pretty good gut feel for that. Now on the Snap side, we kind of cheat because Keith Simpson's an adjunct professor at LSU, and so he gets all the students that comes through. He picks the cream of the crop. We bring them on as interns, and then we eventually hire them whenever they graduate.
Right. I know this next question is going to be something a lot of people in the room are going to relate to, because I asked this question during something the other day, and everyone's hand went up. What I asked was, if you're an entrepreneur, do you have a time management problem? And at the time that I asked that, every single hand went up. And I know you talked a little bit about you had that issue with your developer.
Yeah.
So you're obviously extremely busy, and you also have employees who are, churning out large amounts of work every day. So how do you manage your time effectively, and has there been anything that you've implemented besides flex time that has been extremely good for your employees?
Yeah, you definitely have to run Synapse differently than ECS. Synapse is a lot more creative, different hours, things like that. Nobody punches a clock. Nobody really abuses the system, and we have our base application that we use is called ConnectWise, and that's the way that on any given day we're managing anywhere from 230 projects and service tickets and things like that. So we've sunk hundreds of thousands of dollars into our systems to keep them straight. And we don't care if people come into the office or anything. I mean, we've got mobile apps and everything. They can punch their time, or not punch their time, but the time they're spending at clients and things like that. So ECS is more traditional of 8 to 5 to kind of on the schedule of our customers and clients, and then Synapse is just whenever.
So I know at least Keith in the room we've talked about this in the past about scaling up from having 3 or 4 employees to having 15 or 20 or even where you are now with 47. And I remember last year I met someone who was from North Dakota, and they were working for a software development company up there that had doubled and tripled in size in the last year, and they had been hired to basically manage the human resources side of it and kind of implement processes and everything as they scaled up. So what's your approach? I know you talked a little bit about having someone who knows the business well manage it. I get what's your approach as far as managing those large groups, and how do you figure out when you need to add another layer or when another layer would be detrimental?
That's a great question. So we spent 3 days here with some high-power consultants looking at 3.5 years, 4 years out, where we're going to go. Now this has changed since. Well, actually, a lot of this is the same. So you got the layer of management up there, CEO, all the C-level people, and then Keith over here managing Synapse. And so I'm really not worried about these guys down here. I'm worried about Kevin and John, and then these guys in the red. So that's a layer of management. Before the company was real flat, and there's different levels of business that you go through. It's a lot different when you have 10 employees because you are still micromanaging as much as you don't like to. But at some point you have to let go and then start kind of doing the pyramid effect, I guess, and trusting these people. So it can be a beast if you think about it.
I know you talked about working for Business Land, and so for you, when you jumped into starting ECS, it wasn't really a choice for you because Business Land was shutting down and cutting costs and everything. But if someone is actually either maybe they just left a company or they're in a company right now and they're just doing kind of a standard entry-level position, but they have enough experience they think they can start something on their own, or they want to jump into it, what would be, I get, your top pieces of advice? If you were gonna sit down for 5 minutes with them, what would you tell them?
Okay, here it's pretty easy. Hopefully you worked for a crappy company, for one thing. The other thing is that if you take care of your customers or your client, I call them clients. Clients is a long-term, we think of ECS as a professional services organization like a law firm or a CPA firm. So a customer's kind of short-term, right? You go to Walmart, you're a customer. You grab something, you don't have a relationship with the cashier. So you treat your clients right, you treat your employees right, and you treat your competition right. You want that relationship with your competition because you don't know who's going to be working for who, or if you're going to be working for them, or if they're going to merge in with you at some point or whatever. So, it's pretty easy formula, and you've got to give it 110%. You've got to be totally passionate about it.
So last week at 1 Million Cups, we had a discussion about doing exceptional things for your clients, and obviously you have a large amount of clients. So I know that you guys send out cards around the holidays, and you make different connections with your clients several different ways. So what do you guys do at ECS to kind of make a unique connection with your clients?
Well, we do all the standard stuff, the newsletters and things like that. But the most important thing is just responding. And if you get an email from a client and you respond at 10 o'clock at night, that goes a long way. Just to say, hey, I got it, I'll work on it in the morning. You don't have to, and that's the biggest deal is that the complaints, what few I do get, is because somebody didn't respond to an email till the next day. And get out and see them. Right. It's tough, but at least pick out your top 20 or top 50 and make a point to go see them every now and then.
Right. So I've heard people say stuff like a lot of people when they started a new business, some kind of new startup or services company, they think that it's going to be great. If it's their first thing they're starting, they might think it's going to be awesome, and they're just going to work whenever they want. They're going to work 2 hours a day and call it quits, and that's it. And on that same side, on the flip side of that, I've heard people say, work is 9 to 5, business is 5 to 9.
Yeah.
So, what was your workload when you first started ECS? How many long hours did it take, and what would you tell someone who's just starting about that, to be aware of how much time they're going to actually be using?
Well, my typical day was getting to the office by 6:30. This is Madison Park days, right? There's 2 of us, 2 or 3 people. 6:30, pay the bills till about 8. Pay the bills, get your day, go work from 8 to 5, come back, and then do invoices from 5 to 7, and then get home. and then did that for the first couple of years or so. So, and then Saturdays too. We thought we were going to take off half a day on Fridays and be cool and go play golf and stuff, but that never happened.
I know we're still going to have some time here for the audience to ask questions at the end, but you got about 5 or 10 minutes here. So just feel free to ramble. But what did we not already touch on that you want to tell, all the up and coming entrepreneurs or just everyone out there, kind of interesting stories or advice you have?
Well, it's scary. I had a very stable job. I wasn't happy there, and I knew early on that in order for me to progress with that company, actually I had a boss that, this is kind of it's not a funny story, it's kind of a sad story, but I had a boss that was out of Houston, and he came up, and he was over about, probably about 150 service people, just stressed out, maxed out. He was in Houston, and he passed out in the hall from stress and everything. And I'm going, is that what I'm aspiring to be,
Right.
and everything. So, and also, working for a large company, you don't have any control over their decisions and everything. And that was tough, because I knew we could do better. And it wasn't going to be that hard, but, like I said, you just have to provide exceptional service to where the customer, we have one salesperson, and we just hired them about a year ago. Everything we've done as far as growing from 6 to 4,000 or so has been word of mouth. And that's the best clients to get, because, when they call and say, man, I hear you guys are really good. Well, they're already qualified lead, right? You're not having to go and throw out flyers and do that stuff and weed through all that. And again, you just have to give exceptional service, and you have to create an environment to where everybody wants to come to work. You have to do the laps as an owner. That's what I call it, where you get up and you walk around and you ask people. You don't ask them what are you working on, but you ask them, how's your family? How's everything going? And that goes a long way, especially when you get to this size. It's kind of tough,
right.
Because it's tough to keep the culture when there was 5 of us and we could just sit around a table and drink beer and say, how's it going? But, now it's getting a little more difficult, and we're not stopping here. I mean, we've got probably 4 or 5 positions open now. We hired 9 people last year, and, it's not slowing down.
Right. I know that this is kind of a popular catchphrase right now with a lot of lean startup and different things in the startup world. People like to say, get out of the building. The idea being,
Right.
Get out and get feedback from your customers instead of just sitting behind your screen all day. So have you guys made any major changes that were brought on by something a customer told you?
Not too much. I mean, we do a pretty good job about getting out. I mean, where I'm at now, all these different stages. I mean, there was a time when I was obviously having to get out and work and do all that as far as turning a screwdriver and setting up certain networks and servers and things like that. But, you want to work yourself to irrelevancy, really,
Right.
to where the company can run without you. But not, you don't want to let anybody else know that, because they'll kick you out. But, I mean, spending time here at Cohab, getting more out in the community, being the face and the evangelist of ECS is kind of where I'm at. I still do a lot of business development and things like that. But, I just tell people, I assume, when I meet with them, I say, I assume you're raised right, and we're going to give you some parameters to work in. And if you have a problem or whatever, come see me. Otherwise, I'm going to get out of the way and let them do their job.
Right. I know I've heard, sorry. I lost my train of thought there. Give me just a second. Go ahead if there's anything else you want to say. I'm sorry there.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's been a fun ride. I've been doing this 20 years. Well, last year was our 20-year anniversary. I never thought it would be this big. I thought we'd have like 10 employees, be doing a couple of $1 million a year. I'm excited to see where it's going to go. It's a lot of change. I mean, I started in this industry in '87, and to see where we're at now, you're wearing something on your wrist that's more powerful than the $6,000 computers that we were selling back then or supporting back then. So, we didn't have, again, we didn't have a Cohab, we didn't have lean canvas. We did a traditional business plan. We went the old route, right? We went and borrowed $20,000 from Commercial National Bank, had to put our coat and tie on, but what was good about that was it held us accountable. And it not like a lot of companies that just get a bunch of money. They go out and the entrepreneurs, Keith again, they go out and raise some money from their friends and family and everything, and then their idea doesn't work, and then they just go home and try to get some more money. And I don't like that.
I was going to ask you, because I've heard this from several people that a lot of people, by the time the company's been around as long as yours has, or they've been at it for 5 or 10 years, and you ask them, you say, what's your favorite part? And if you'd asked them in the first year, they might have told you it was the technical side of whatever it was. And by 5 or 10 years in, they say, well, it's the organization building and it's the team building. Is that true for you? Is the organization building your favorite part? Yeah,
I like that. I like seeing people grow within the company professionally. I like seeing the company grow. I like getting out and hearing people talk good about us. The number one thing, and this is tough, and it's tough in the beginning because, again, if you treat your customers right and your employees right and your competition right, and don't focus on the numbers. Now that's tough. When you're first starting out and you've got $5,000 in the bank, that's real tough. But really, if you focus on those 3 areas, the numbers are going to come. I mean, our first year we did $125,000 in gross revenue. Ron and myself, we were paying ourselves $24,000 a year. We got through that first year. We probably netted about 10. And we were high-fiving each other. We gave ourselves a $2,000 bonus and said how we're kicking ass. And I look back now, and now it costs around $375,000 a month just to keep the lights on.
Wow.
So that's why I don't have any hair. But I don't worry about the numbers, right?
Right. I just had kind of 2 final questions here. One thing was, we talked about employees coming in with flex time and not being as strict on when they work. I know I've heard from a lot of employees who are what they call knowledge workers, where you're doing IT or software or any of these other things where you're using a lot of brain power. And I know a lot of people say their main motivation going to work every day is they're excited about what they're working on, or they're just really passionate about it. So with your employees, have you found that, or were there specific things that you found that motivate them more, or is it generally just that?
Well, I think a lot of it's that. The cool thing about Synapse too, I mean, we've got a lot of resources on Sky Coach right now, and Keith's doing a really good job keeping them motivated and sharing in the success of that. But also the cool thing about Synapse is being a custom app development place is that people are always working on something different. They're just not working on a product. Now that might shift if Sky Coach really takes off. But you want to keep it interesting for them. On the ECS side, we're all about certification, sending people to training. We pay for their college, we pay for training. Money is not always a factor for a lot of people. It's professional growth, and along with that comes raises and bonuses and things like that.
Right. I know, just a final question here. I know that there's a certain company you've worked with and hosted servers for that's kind of interesting from your perspective, but was there ever something with ECS or Synapse where one of your employees was demoing you something or showing you something they were building for a client, and your eyes just kind of lit up and you were like, wow, we can do that, like we actually built that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that on the Synapse side that we've done, but we've just really done a poor job marketing and really getting it going. I mean, we've had a couple of guys that we've tried to get into the startup prize here with that. They had some good ideas and everything. So, we're like I said before, we're real open to people and bringing ideas to us and everything. Sky Coach was the one that really lit me up. Right. And the partners, because that's a chunk of change. I mean, we're going to spend $120,000 just in advertising this year on it.
Right. I know I said that was going to be my last question, but I do have one more. Just because you talked about Sky Coach again, I know you talked about the 50-50 partners in the beginning, and you have a couple more partners now that you all run everything together. But going back to kind of people that are starting up now and they're splitting it with one or two other people, I know you talked about having kind of trouble, that 50-50 split wasn't working right. So how does someone who's just starting figure out, how much do they control, how much do they give to someone else? How do they figure that equity split out?
Well, obviously, you just need 51-49 to have somebody who can make a decision. I mean, it's kind of tough. Now, if you have three people, you have a tiebreaker.
Right.
It is tough. And when you're going into something, and like my dad told me, he said, son, when you're going into it, it's not that big of a deal. It's when you're getting out of it. And that's when the, that's when the problem is, I mean, so, that's kind of tough. I mean, when we brought Kevin Cook on as a partner, Herb McElroy and Vestal, then we had that tiebreaker and everything. And then we eventually, Ron just wasn't pulling his weight and wasn't partner material. So he had to go.
Right. This might be the scary part for you, depending on what people ask. But now we're going to have about 10 or 15 minutes for the audience to ask questions.
Anybody back there? I don't see any hands. Keith.
So I was going to say, so if you ask your question, Keith, and then if you can repeat it, Jim, so we can just get it on the recording.
Do I agree that there's a loyalty problem? I don't think on the Synapse side that there is, because we pay really well, and Keith is, like I said, we have an unfair advantage with Keith, right? He's already getting the people in. He's vetting them, at their junior, senior year, and then he pulls them in and does that. So we have very little turnover. Now, we had I know what you're saying, because I think in a lot of the shops around here, I won't mention any names, you guys do good, but there's other companies here that have a single product, and I think programmers probably get kind of bored, and then they just look for the money, It's just a cool place to work. No, really. I mean, you create an environment, you create a culture, you have open lines of communication. You care about your employees, or I don't want to call them employees. You care about the people you work with. And if there is a problem, you try to stop it pretty quickly. Again, we haven't really had anybody leave because of money, per se. And we're not one either to say, oh, well, we'll counter that, because at that point they're gone anyway. But now we don't poach, right? We don't go after other developers, but if they come to us, well, I'll say we poached a couple of times. But, it's like, and then, the other company's saying you stole them away from us. No, we didn't steal them. If they're going to come, they're going to come. I mean, and it's because they want to come work at Synapse or ECS.
Right.
Merrill?
Yes, and
Jim, I'm Merrill Watland. I'm a banker.
Banker.
Yeah. You did a great job of talking about the operational aspects of your company, the growth modes you went through, the way you developed your products. One of the things as a banker that we look at, obviously, most companies at some point in their life will need some kind of financing. It'll be either from a bank, or it might be from capital injection, investors, something where they're accountable for that. One of the things that I've encountered in my life with dealing with privately held companies, particularly if they're closely held, that haven't necessarily evolved into the structure you have, is that a lot of times they try to be employees of their own company, and they don't necessarily pay as much attention to their financial position as they should. They try to delegate that out. Sometimes that results in fraud. Sometimes it results in misspent funding. There could be rapid growth where you're not accounting for things. How did you, as you were building your company, how active were you in the financial integrity of your business? Because a lot of entrepreneurs I run into, they really want to distance themselves from that part of their company, and they don't manage their company appropriately that way. So I wanted you to expand on that, if you wouldn't mind.
Right. Well, early on, I definitely had a crash course in how to read a balance sheet and a P&L and everything like that. And, I say don't look at the numbers. Well, I was pretty anal about that, you know, early on, and I would look at it and compare month to month. Nowadays, I mean, you know, Kevin Cook's on our CFO. He's a CPA. I don't look at the numbers as much or as in detail, and you know, so yeah, I was very active in it, and I enjoyed that because you see the growth of the business. You know, you see the net numbers going up, hopefully, and the gross numbers going up. So, you know, but yeah, there's been several, Merrill, there's several companies that we work with where the owners are not involved that much, and then they end up finding out that somebody stole $3 million, you know, large construction company, somebody embezzled $3 million or whatever out of them, and they never saw it coming. So, good question.
We're going to take a couple more questions, but I just wanted to ask something I thought about during that question, which was obviously you talked about, you know, the professional development aspect of your employees, but as far as, you know, prospective employees that come to you and you know, and want to work for either ECS or Synapse, you know, obviously today the training is different than it was 10 or 15 years ago. They still have, you know, the Cisco certifications on that side, but do you have employees that, or possible employees that show up and they have, you know, they're self-taught, or they maybe didn't go through the traditional route, but they learned, you know, on their own or through some alternative?
Absolutely, yeah. You know, on the Snap side, I mean, most of those people are either degreed or masters, you know, easily. ECS, I mean, we've got guys that have been tinkering with computers since they were 18 years old, and they've just, you know, and we give them some tests during the interview process and see how they go. So we're not so focused on the certifications that they're bringing to the table. I mean, obviously that's good, and experience is good, and that kind of showed, you know, where we're going to rank them as we hire them. But, you know, for the most part, you know, we don't care if they have a degree. I mean, you know, I certainly don't, and so how could I?
Right.
You know, I know there's a lot of companies around here that are focused on GPAs and all that stuff, but no.
Right. Does anybody else have questions?
And you are?
I'm John Grinley with Cohab. Jim, can you tell them the story you always tell me? Because a lot of these guys had the story about you walking around talking to folks at your office.
Yeah, that was the thing. As a, you know, early on, and it's just a habit I started way early. And I call it, you know, taking the laps and everything. And you know, when we first started out, we were in a 105 square foot office space, and so taking a lap was like leaning over and go, "Hey man, we're still kicking butt, right?" And so, you know, now it's a little bit more. We're in 14,000 square feet, but again, you want to get up, and the door's always open. I mean, that's a cliche, but you want to get up, and you want people to see you, you know, and just, you know, not necessarily talk about business, but, you know, talk about their daughter's soccer game or something like that, and things like that. And that goes a long way, and that's real easy to do. You know, that takes 10 minutes, 15 minutes or so. And so, you know.
I was wanting to say the funny story you had about doing that.
Oh,
so
yeah.
That's what I was getting at.
Oh, yeah, that one. Okay, so I'm going around and doing that for a while, and then there was two guys that were going to do the startup prize, and so they came into the conference room, and they sat down, and Duke was one of them, and Sammy was the other one. And Duke says, well, Jim wants to sponsor us for the startup prize and everything. And Sammy goes, well, what do you do here? And I said, well, I'm the CEO. He said, really? He goes, I thought you were just a nice guy that came around and said hi to everybody all the time. So it was pretty funny.
So I guess my question, that led me to my question, is how do you, I mean, you're managing, obviously you started the company. Just, it seems like you have a good way about yourself and just kind of checking your egos. How do you, I mean, is that conscious, or is that just your personality?
Well, that's, you know, I think that a lot of that's my personality, but that's a, you know, we talk about positive culture, creating an environment where people want to come to work. It can certainly be the flip side if you have a big ego, if you're greedy or whatever, because, you know, we talked about this, right? Managing to the negative. What do? You manage, you got a lot of turnover, you're losing customers, you're having to try to just tread water. Whereas if you're managing to the positive, you're growing, you're maintaining your clients, you're maintaining your employees, you know, the people you work with, and it's just a positive environment, and that's what you want, you know. People with big egos are probably going to fail, really. making everybody work.
Yeah, well, I can't. The cord doesn't reach out.
Hey, I'm Brooke Bryan with Bookkeeper
Yeah,
Girl.
Brooke, sure.
My question to you is for people who are just starting out, whether they're with a partner or it's just them, you had to do this. You've already been through it. What was your motivation? Because there are days when it's just hard.
It's tough.
It's really hard. So what was your motivation? What kind of kept you motivated to keep going, to turn it into the monster that it turned into today?
Well, I mean, you know, I love what I do, and I loved, and it's real easy to stay at home, right? And not, I mean, you got to have a place to go, Cohab, wherever, get up, and our motivation obviously was paying off that $20,000 because I had $20,000 loan because I hate to be in debt, but it's also, you know, it's exciting to watch the business grow and to gain new, you know, you can get into a rut, and certainly we have ours, you know, around Christmas time or whatever, where everybody thinks, you know, Kevin's like, oh gosh, it's slow, and I go, dude, it's been slow for 20 years at this time of year, you know, it's a pattern. But I mean, it's just be passionate about what you do, and you know, and try not to stay in bed, you know, or whatever. I don't know if that answered your question or not, but
One other question.
yeah.
So do you think for small business owners who are just starting out, is it better to go and try and get a loan to start your business, or is it better to try and start smaller, and you may not get to do everything that you want to do and that you hope for your company, but you take it slower and then you're not in debt while you're starting out?
Yeah, well, what we did was we looked at two business plans, and so when the IT industry was changing, right, Dell was coming out, the clones and all this, so instead of $6,000 computers, the white box pushers were selling them for $3,000 or $2,000. So there was a total shift, and we were lucky that we looked at a retail store where we were going to have to borrow $200,000, which scared me to death, or a service company, which we could, you know, $20,000 isn't that much. That was enough to give us enough padding for a few months' salary, and, you know, tools and stuff like that. So, you know, I'm a proponent of, if you can, start off small and grow into it. Really, I just don't like to be in debt, you know. And but yeah. Oh yeah, sorry, Meryl. Yeah. I'll come borrow $20,000 from you.
Yeah. Before we take another question, I just had one question off of what she said. That was kind of the small business side of it. But on kind of the high growth startup side of it, you know, usually the people have a choice: bootstrap, you know, with money they already have, or go after, you know, venture capital or angel investments. Right. I guess this is two questions. How do you recommend someone make that decision? And also, if you're an investor that's watching someone pitch you for investment in something, what would you look for that would get you excited about it, and what would be a bad sign?
Well, a bad sign, you know, I mean, there's a lot of people that will go out and raise a lot of capital and pay themselves a lot of salary, and that's a bad sign. You know, if you're not acting like a startup, now, granted, you know, if you're developing a product or a software product or whatever, it's going to take more than $20,000 to do that, right? And so I'm not all about borrowing a lot of money from Merrill if you need to, or angel investing or whatever, you know. It just depends on what you're trying to do. And it's got to be something different and unique. You know, there's a lot of people that are doing the same thing. They're just putting a different skin on it, right, and everything.
Okay, I'm Carolyn. I have a restaurant, Blue, and I'm kind of at a weird place in my restaurant. So I want someone to talk to, you know, because what's happened is I started this little funky restaurant in the world's smallest building, but I already had a catering business. My catering business is really well. And I work in a kitchen the size of a walk-in closet. And now all of a sudden I had these cooking classes, I'm doing a cookbook, and I actually had to close down my restaurant because I don't have room for anyone to be in my kitchen but me. And so, like, when I do open for lunch, I'll get 70 to 90 people in a 28-seat restaurant. It's just crazy. It's just insane. So I'm at the point where I either need to build this master big kitchen where I have a lot of cooks and can do catering, can do lunch, or I need to stay really small and cut off the restaurant or cut off I'm trying to make all these decisions because everything I do, each component is too successful to handle being in this restaurant. But I own the restaurant, I have no debt, and I don't want to get, so anyway, so I'm kind of in this crazy weird position now that I just want a mentor. Where do you find a mentor for? That's what I'm
Right
looking
here.
for, because I don't know what to do next.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's why my restaurant's closed right now, actually, because I'm at this point to where
You're making too much money catering.
I've got I'm making way too much money catering, but I don't have the space to keep the restaurant going and cater.
Yeah. Well, part of Cohab, I mean, Grant Knuckles is a great resource here who owns Twisted Root. There are, that's the beauty about Cohab is that they can connect the dots and try to get you in touch with somebody who's got that kind of experience.
Yeah, because I've never even worked in a restaurant kitchen when I opened my restaurant.
Yeah.
So, I've never worked in anybody else's restaurant before.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of now I've reached a point I really just need advice.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I would get with John.
Okay.
Get with John Grant,
Okay.
and he'll tell you. And that's a good problem to have. I mean, there's a lot of things that we dabbled in. I mean, we had a training group one time, and towards the end they weren't very profitable, and we had to make the decision of where's your money coming from. Where's your most of your money coming from?
Okay, Anton, Dalton, I see you both back there. I know one of you has to have a question about something.
All right, my name is Dalton Dean. I have a startup called Mainspring. So from a technical perspective, or really from an early on building your team, do you take talent or experience?
That's kind of more of it depends. I mean, on the ECS side, it depends on what position we're trying to fill. Right now, we're looking for experience. On the Snap side, it's a little different because it's software development, obviously, and maybe looking for talent more than experience because there's some 15-year-olds that are extremely talented, but not a lot of experience. So yeah, that's kind of a, you may want to come and visit with Keith Simpson. Yeah, he could probably answer that a little better.
My name is Anton Winder. I do a little bit of everything here in Shreveport, I guess. So in my professional experience working for both service companies and for product companies, trying to do both under the same roof causes a kind of bifurcation in motivations and processes that is not sustainable. It seems if you have one company that's trying to offer services and build a product at the same time, they're constantly robbing Peter to pay Paul or robbing Peter and Paul to pay Simon. Between ECS and Synapse, I'm sure that at some point when the merger happened, you had to make those considerations. How did you manage them? What were the manifestations of the differences in a service company and a product company? And how do you keep them separate? How do you keep that Chinese wall up, but still manage them both and manage the differences in the two? The two ways the companies need to be run, how they scale differently, their growth plans, they're different. So how have you managed that?
Well, if you've ever been to our office and at one time we had Synapse and ECS kind of all merged together in the same building. We had about 9,000 square feet, and we outgrew that in about 18 months, and so we had to take in another 5,000 square feet. And so that was the Synapse side, right? And that was totally different than the ECS side. It's all cubicles, it's a bunch of monitors, it's a bunch of guys running around, help desk guys and this kind of stuff. But when you go over to, as you saw, when you go over to the Synapse side, it's a totally different environment. And there's not a whole lot of interaction between, and I know what you mean, because the ECS guys are going, well, why they come in at 10 o'clock in the morning? Why can't we come in at 10 o'clock in the morning? You have to keep those separate, and really, you can't give answers like, well, that's just the way it is. You have to explain that, and that's the problem with a lot of managers or stuff, is that if you're gonna ask somebody to do something or you're gonna change somebody's life, you've got to come up with a reason why you're doing that and an explanation. And so, you know, we say, well, they come in at 10 because they stay till 7 or 8 o'clock at night. Now, if you'd like to that schedule, you're welcome to that. But it's, you know, the two sides get along. I'm curious how it's going to be when we do develop our sales force, because that's where I had my rub when I was a systems engineer, because our salespeople at Businessland were selling anything to make their quota, and then Jim's got to go out and try to make this stuff work. And, you know, I'm sorry, this typewriter's not going to be a printer, you know, and things like that. I mean, you know, and so we've got to be careful in that. I'm more worried about that because there's always a wall between sales and service, rather than on the there's enough differences on the Synapse side that and the ECS side that they both sides recognize that.
Does anyone else have questions? John Scott?
What's next? The beach? No, just kidding. It's going to keep growing. I mean, you know, it's you know, we're all. I'm still excited after 20 years and been in the business 27. I'm looking forward to seeing the next step. I mean, we're all, you know, we've had some hiccups, you know, obviously as most companies do, but you know, you just get through them. And you know, the funny thing is, I didn't touch on this, but you know, talking about customers is, and this is hard when you first start out, but it's a little easier when you get on, is that, you know, you have to recognize your best customers and you got to get rid of your worst customers. And so many times people just hang on to them, and you know, and we're part of a peer group, so we get together about once a quarter with this other group, and this guy was talking about bad customers and everything. He said we ought to get some Lance Armstrong, you know, wrist things on that says lose early, you know, and you need to do that. You need to have a frank conversation with your client. I fired one of the casinos early on. It was good money, but it's absolutely killing us because they're 7x24, they're slow pay, and they don't want to pay. And one of my employees was just about to have a nervous breakdown. He's in the corner sucking his thumb, you know, in fetal position, and you know, and so I called him up and I said, you know, we can't do work for you anymore. And they got pissed off and said, why not? And I said, this is the reason. And they said, well, you can't do that. I want to talk to an owner. And I said, okay, hello, I'm the owner. So anyway, it was tough to do though, because you know, a lot of times, like, again, it's that greed factor, right? The numbers look great at first, but in the end, it's going to end up costing you grief and more time and possibly employees.
So John Scott asked, you know, what's next? So 5 or 10 years from now, say, you know, someone's managing ECS, you're out of the day-to-day. Are you going to be on the beach, or are you going to be starting something new?
I'm going to probably start something new, and I don't know if it'll be technology related or whatever. Obviously, nothing to hurt ECS, and this is on down the road, obviously. But no, I couldn't see hanging it up and, you know, going brim fishing or anything. You know, maybe take a break for a while, but it's fun. I love, you know, I mean, Cohab's great at, you know, in the startups. John Scott's been doing great, and, you know, being around startups and everything, that's cool stuff.
Right. Just kind of a final wrap up here. You answer a lot of the questions with a bit of humor. So is that part, you know, obviously you go through a lot of trials and tribulations and problems when you're running a startup or scaling a large business like yours. So is that humor? Is that just part of your natural personality, or is there something you do to kind of keep that, you know, when at a point if everything's going wrong and you need to stay upbeat about it? Yeah.
Well, you know, obviously you want to, you know, I mean, I like humor. I like to laugh. I think that breaks up a lot of stuff. You know, and you don't want to ever see your employees or let your employees see you sweating and doing that, because again, when we were losing $50,000 a month at Synapse, it was hard to go in the back around the guys and keep a, you know, knock.
Right.
Anyway.
Now that I've asked about 6 final questions, does the audience have any more questions? Anyone? Okay, I want to thank Jim for being here today, and everyone give him a round of applause.
Thank y'all. Appreciate it.